Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at Morphy's, down here in the corner, behind this rather large Italian machine gun. This is a Breda Model 37 that we're taking a look at. And it's not a gun that's much known in the US. It's not a gun that gets a lot of respect even when it is known, but I don't think much of that is deserved. This is actually a darn good machine gun. Now, the best way to think about this probably is in terms of, this is Italy's equivalent to the Browning 1919 A4. They're both basically a big box with a barrel sticking out one end. They're intended to be, at the time, they probably would have been called heavy machine guns because they were only intended to be used from a tripod. They're fixed position guns. Today we think of a heavy machine gun as a large caliber one. If you go back to World War I and World War II, a heavy machine gun was a static machine gun, typically belt-fed, either with a very heavy air-cooled barrel, which is what we have here, or with a water-cooled barrel. The Vickers, the Maxim, those were considered heavy machine guns. Today we have squad automatic weapons, we have general purpose machine guns, GPMGs, and the GPMG is sort of the role that this would fit into now, or a medium machine gun. At any rate, it's not meant to be fired by one man on the assault. It is a fixed position gun. This was run by a crew of 3, supported by 6 men carrying and supplying ammunition. So in theory, one of these, you've got 9 men actually working this gun to keep it running. Again, not that much different from a Browning 1919 A4. It requires a tripod to use unless you're just slinging it from the hip like Rambo. It will support an attack. It can form a key point of a defensive line. That's what these guns were meant for. Now, Breda began development of this in 1933, although it wasn't developed from scratch. Breda had already done mechanically a pretty similar gun in their PG rifle, which is incidentally the first rifle produced with a burst fire mechanism instead of semi and full auto. I have a separate video on the PG if you're interested in it. Once we get done with this one, I bet you'll find that interesting to see the similarities in the working mechanism. Anyway, the gun is formally adopted by the Italian Army in 1936 as the Model 37. The first orders placed in 36, the first couple thousand guns are delivered in 1937. And functionally, this is intended to replace the Fiat model of 1935. Now, the Fiat was essentially a belt-fed conversion of the old Fiat Ravelli 1914 guns, which feed from this really goofy mousetrap box, cube mag system. It's kind of a unique thing. I also have a video on that gun if you want to see it. Although I don't have a video yet on the Fiat 35. Anyway, the Fiat 35 was sort of an interim adaptation. This was the long-term solution to a medium/heavy machine gun for the Italians. Also important to point out that the Breda 37 was developed for the 8x59mm cartridge. This is a fairly obscure, unknown cartridge in the US because it was only ever used in just a couple of guns. Essentially, after World War I, Italy decided that they should go to a 2-cartridge standard. Think of this kind of as like 5.56 and 7.62 NATO. Your rifles use 5.56, your heavier machine guns, and your squad automatic weapons use 5.56. Your heavier machine guns that are emplaced on tripods or in turrets on vehicles, they use a heavier cartridge because they have the potential to deliver accurate, effective fire to a much longer distance than something that's being fired from the shoulder. So 1,000, perhaps even 2,000 meters for area effect is a realistic idea with a gun like this mounted on a tripod. But if you're shooting, say, 6.5mm Carcano, which the Italian Army was using when this was developed, you lose a lot of the potential because of the light bullet of a small diameter cartridge like 6.5. So the idea was we'll have a heavier cartridge for our heavy machine guns, and that was the 8x59. The Fiat Model 35 used it, and the Breda Model 37 used it. This was a 210 grain bullet running at 2,600 feet per second. So it was fairly comparable to 8mm Mauser. And it's worth pointing out that 8mm Mauser, especially by World War II, was running a heavy bullet that was intended for long range. It was intended to be ideal for the machine guns and then functional for rifles. This is the classic choice that military forces have. Do we run all the same cartridge in all of the guns and accept that it's going to be inferior in one of the applications, or do we split and supply logistics for 2 separate cartridges so that we can have very efficient rifles and very efficient heavy machine guns? Anyway, um, there was a brief consideration of converting these to 7.35 Carcano early in World War II. The Italian Army tried to convert to 7.35, and that would have been a universal cartridge. It didn't work, and they kind of pushed the "oh no, go back" button and went back to 6.5. It was a bit of a snafu. At any rate, the Breda 37s were always in 8x59. Now, this particular one has actually been rechambered for 8x57 Mauser, standard 8mm Mauser, by an owner here in the US so that it can be shot, because there is no 8x59 ammo available these days. Anyway, the next thing that we need to talk about before we take this apart is the 20-round feed strip. Feed strips were a well-known feed mechanism at this time. Of course, like all of the Hotchkiss guns used feed strips. Those are best known as being the French Army machine guns, but they were also used by a lot of smaller client states who bought guns for export. Feed strips have benefits over belts in that they don't tear, they're much less susceptible to degradation, they're not susceptible to water, to moisture. In theory, you could eventually have these rust, but that takes a while and it's pretty obvious. The problem you get with cloth belts in wet weather is that the belts will swell and then dry out and swell. And if they're too swollen, you can have cartridges that are held too tightly and won't feed. Over time, you can have problems with the belts then stretching, and when they're dry, they won't hold cartridges tightly enough, and rounds will move, get out of alignment and cause malfunctions or just fall out altogether. Metallic feed strips solved a lot of those problems, and the problem that a lot of people have with them today, the objection that people have to them today, is you've got a super heavy machine gun like this with a massive barrel. It's a 42-pound gun, but it's only got a 20-round capacity. Like, what a waste of potential. Because a lot of people are looking at these as, okay, let's say I go and get one of these for myself. I'm feeding it 20 rounds at a time. In reality, like I said, there's a 9-man crew running this gun, 6 of them supplying strips and 3 of them actually running the gun. You have an assistant gunner whose job is just to stuff new strips into the gun. This essentially is going to fire at the same cadence as a belt-fed gun, because changing belts is a much more time-intensive operation than just stuffing another feed strip in. All you do with this is you wait for one feed strip to be mostly done, and you just slide this in right behind it, and the rate of fire is essentially unimpeded by the change. So strips for the Breda hold 20 rounds. They're nice solid strips. They're a little more solid than Hotchkiss strips. And the one really interesting thing about this is the Breda actually stuffs the empty cases back into the strip before it kicks it out the other side of the gun. Now, why was this done? The best reason I've come across is the Italians simply wanted to be able to reuse their empty brass. It was a valuable resource, and they didn't want to have it all dumped all over the ground everywhere, presumably mostly during training exercises when it's not that big a deal to be, picking up your spent brass. In actual combat, guys are maybe a little less likely to get every one of these that they need because they're supplied with a ton of them. There's a story that this was done because the gun was developed for armored vehicles, and you didn't want brass cases bouncing around inside. That sounds good, but there actually was a specific vehicular version of this gun made, the Breda 38, and it used top-fed box magazines, and it did spit cases out all over the place. So I think this really was more about preserving and keeping brass so that it could be reused, either not necessarily reloaded, but the brass itself reused and not just thrown away. Anyway, let's dig into how this works, because it's a really impressive gun. It's reliable, it's accurate, it's durable, and it's well built and well designed. We will start with the markings here. We have machine gun, Breda Model 37, serial number 31,000 and change, made in Rome at the Breda factory. And then the date of manufacture is 1942, which is also the 20th year of the fascist government in Italy, which was marked on a lot of their firearms during the fascist period. The tripod here is actually a Portuguese contract tripod, so it's marked slightly differently, but it's still machine gun, heavy, Breda, 7.9 millimeter. 938 is the Portuguese designation, M938. They adopted it in 1938. The tripod itself is heavily derived from the Austrian Schwarzlos tripod. It's a pretty good system, really. We've got extendable legs on the front, so you can lift the whole gun up or down. You've got these bars that just unlock back there, so you can fold the legs back. But when locked in place, these give them a good amount of stability. There are a pair of locking levers here. So this one allows me to just pivot the gun up and down freely, and this one allows me to pivot the gun side to side freely. You can lock those in place, and then you have dials here and here for fine adjustment of elevation and windage. We have a pair of spade grips on the gun and a thumb trigger here. There is no semi-auto functionality. So the trigger's full auto. There's a safety, which is just this little bar. So you've got S for safe and F for fire. And literally all this is doing is just preventing you from pushing the trigger in. So very simple safety there. The charging handle is right here on the side. Lock the bolt open. Push the charging handle forward. It is an open bolt firing gun. So bolt's open. When I pull the trigger, the bolt drops and fires. We have a rear sight here that lifts up for use. And then I can either push this button in and freely slide the rear sight notch, or I can use the screw wheel at the top to give it a precise fine adjust. That is calibrated out to 2,800 meters. There's also a rear sight notch right here so that you can also use it with a point blank zero when the sight's folded down. We have dust covers on both sides of the feed tray, entrance and exit, because of course this feed strip, which by the way goes in cartridges facing down, it's going to slide in there and it's going to come in this side and go all the way across and get spit out the other side full of empty brass. Now there's one other control lever here, and it's this guy. That actually locks the top cover down. So you don't need to open the top cover to feed a new strip in, but you do if you need to address a malfunction or disassemble the gun. And to do that, you first flip this to the forward position. Then you can grab these two serrated grasping pads, lift up, and the top cover opens up. The top cover actually opens way up, folds all the way forward like that. Now to disassemble the gun, the first thing I need to do is pull out this pin. It is captive, and all I have to do is pull it out like that. Then, and by the way, I want to make sure the bolt is forward, which it is. Then I'm going to push in on this, which is the end of the spring buffer assembly. I'm push that in and then lift the spade grip assembly up. There we go. So this collar right here locks in and just locks the spade grip assembly in place. By the way, right here, you can see exactly how the trigger works. When I push the trigger, it just lifts these two hooks up. These are holding onto the bolt. That is the sear engagement surface. So when I lift that up, the bolt just goes forward. And because it's full auto, it will continue to cycle back and forth until it runs out of ammo, or I let those hooks back down. The rest of this process is super easy. All I do is pull the charging handle back, and I can pull the whole bolt, gas piston, and spring assembly out of the gun. A couple other elements to show you before we move on. The feed tray, the right side just lifts right out. It's got a pair of little tabs right there that slide into grooves in the receiver. On the left side, we actually have a spring lever here. I have to pull this in order to slide this side of the feed tray out. This is also a locking lever, so when the feed strip is empty, this prevents the bolt from being dropped forward, so you don't have to recock the gun when you put in a new strip. This locks it open until you put in a new strip and then hit that lever and it'll release the bolt. And I can also, there we go, lift this side right out of the receiver. So that's handy, especially for packing and transportation. It makes the whole gun about, well, less than half as wide as it otherwise would be. That rear sight is paired with this truly massive triangular front sight there. One last simple control here. We can remove the barrel by pulling this pin out to unlock it, rotate it up, and then I just rotate the barrel. The barrel assembly comes out.
we've got a basic cylindrical flash hider on there. We've got our gas system. This is a very heavy barrel because that's how it stays cool. It's just by having a lot of mass. We have an adjustable gas system, so you can tune, technically you can tune the rate of fire. More importantly, you can tune it to be reliable with whatever batch of ammunition you have. And this is just held in by a set of interrupted threads. So a really easy interchangeable barrel. They did actually have a tool that held on back here to take the barrel off the gun when it was hot. I don't have that tool here, but you don't need it when it's cool. So that leaves us with just essentially a box. And by the way, this attaches in a very cool method to the tripod. Instead of having a couple of cross pins like we're used to on like British and American machine guns, we have a locking lever. Well, we have a locking crank and a locking lever here. I'm going to unscrew this just slightly. There's a little press clamp up here that tightens everything in. And then I rotate that 180 degrees back, and the gun slides forward and lifts off. It just has a dovetail bracket here, and that locks into that cutout there. So in a lot of ways, this is actually simpler, better, easier. Oh, and you can see the cut there. So when I turn this crank, I'm actually squeezing the front of the mount. So that is really easy to lock in place. The gas piston here at the front is pretty self-explanatory and simple. The spring assembly at the back is the same. This is our main recoil spring. We have a much heavier buffer spring here, so the last impact of this assembly on the end of the receiver, the energy gets absorbed there instead of battering the gun. All right, so what we have here, we have a bolt carrier with gas piston, of course, and this is essentially our ejector. Now, this is very reminiscent of the Breda PG. If you go look at my video on the Breda PG rifles, you'll see they have the same angular traveling system. Now, the firing pin's a little bit different in that on the Model 37 here, this, by the way, is the locked position upward, and this is the unlocked position. So when it comes to here, the case is in our extractor grooves here sitting on the breech face. This is going to, the bolt carrier is going to slam forward, and that fin hits the firing pin right here, pushes in the firing pin, fires the cartridge. Then gas, once the round's fired, gas is going to push this whole assembly backward while the bolt stays in place. So there's a little bit of travel here where it's just going straight back. That's the dwell time, so that allows pressure to drop in the chamber to a safe level. Then the bolt hits the angled section of this track and it starts to drop downward. That is unlocking it so that the whole thing can travel backward, and you can see that the extractor here is going to go from that position where the cartridge is fully in the case, in the bolt face there, and as it travels, this is going to push the empty case up out of those extractor grooves. So what that's going to do is, of course, free the empty, it's going to pull the empty case out, and then it's going to free it from the bolt face, so the bolt face can pick up the next cartridge. However, there is one little bit of extractor lip on the top right there, and that's going to stay hooked into the case head, and it's going to pull the empty case back out of the, well, it's already out of the chamber because this is pulling back as it unlocks, but it's going to pull the empty case back into the feed strip. So the cartridge was initially pushed out of the strip by that fin, and then as this comes back, it's actually putting the empty case back into the feed strip. The whole time that's happening, we have this lug right here that's operating the top cover. And by the way, this lug is spring-loaded so that you can close the top cover in any position, and this will just snap into place when it's lined up properly. Like, that's a feature that a lot of World War II guns didn't have. But let me show you where this is in the top cover. Inside the top cover, we have this reciprocating slide, and it controls the feed pulls here. So you can see this track is straight all the way until the very end when it has a little dog leg. So when it's all the way back, it's going to pull this feed pull out to that side, and then when it moves forward, it pulls it back in again. That is going to cycle the feed strip in one position. Now you can see this hole up here, that is where this lug sits. And so as the bolt carrier assembly goes back and forth, it is pushing this back and forth, and at the very end of travel, it cycles. So it's during this section of travel that the empty case comes back out of the chamber, gets put into the now empty position in the feed strip, and then at the very end, once the empty case is in, then the feed strip is cycled one position. Well, these lugs come back, they hook onto the next set of notches in the feed strip, because they're hooking onto these notches, little bumps, and then they're going to pull it in one position. Now there's a live round in front of this fin, and as the bolt carrier goes forward, this is going to strip the round out of that position in the feed strip into the chamber and repeat the whole cycle. So that's the Breda 37 all the way field stripped. This is a remarkably simple, durable, effective gun. It was really well liked in the field. It was well liked by the Italians. It was well liked by the Germans as well. These were used by Allied troops when they had the opportunity. When they captured a gun and could put it to use, they did. The guns were accurate, they were durable. Really, it's a vastly underappreciated gun, in part because of those feed strips, and in part, I think, because of its rarity. We just have very, very few of these in the United States. Manufacture of the Breda 37 ran from, of course, 1937, clear until, well, in fact, after the Italian armistice in late 1943. Production was pretty hefty on these. By 1942, they were building 1,000 a month. That picked up even more. First quarter of 43, they did 4,000 of them. In addition to purchases by the Italian army, these were also adopted by Portugal as the M938. I don't know exactly how many Portugal bought. This is actually a Portuguese tripod on this particular one right now. But sold to Portugal as well. After the Italian armistice, Breda did continue to manufacture them for a time for Germany. And the Germans would get something like 1,300 of these, specifically made for them. There was some talk at one point of expanding manufacture beyond just the Breda factory so that they could increase production even more, but that never actually happened. All of them ended up being manufactured by Breda. And it says something about the quality and the utility and durability of the gun that it actually continued in Italian military service after World War II, into the early 1950s. Eventually, the Italians would adopt a copy of the MG42, but this was, we're talking close to 20 years. This was the standard Italian heavy machine gun. Anyway, these are extremely scarce in the US right now. There's something like less than half a dozen of them that are transferable on the US registry. So very cool of Morphy's to give us a chance to take a look at this one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.